We're reading from Mark 5, verses 1 to 20. Jesus and his disciples came to the other side of the lake, to the region of Gerasene. As soon as Jesus got out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out of the tombs. This man lived among the tombs, and no one was ever strong enough to restrain him, even with a chain. He had been secured many times with leg irons and chains, but he broke the chains and smashed the leg irons. No one was tough enough to control him. Night and day in the tombs and the hills, he would howl and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from far away, he ran and knelt before him, shouting, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to God that you won't torture me." He said this because Jesus had already commanded him, "Unclean spirit, come out of the man." Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He responded, "Legion is my name, because we are many." They pleaded with Jesus not to send them out of that region. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the hillside. "Send us into the pigs," they begged. "Let us go into the pigs." Jesus gave them permission, so the unclean spirits left the man and went into the pigs. Then the herd of about 2,000 pigs rushed down the cliff into the lake and drowned. Those who tended the pigs ran away and told the story in the city and in the countryside. People came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the man who used to be demon-possessed. They saw the very man who had been filled with many demons, sitting there fully dressed. And completely sane, and they were filled with awe. Those who had actually seen what had happened to the demon-possessed man told the others about the pigs. Then they pleaded with Jesus to leave their region. While he was climbing into the boat, the one who had been demon-possessed pleaded with Jesus to let him come along as one of his disciples. But Jesus wouldn't allow it. "Go home to your own people," Jesus said, "and tell them what the Lord has done for you and how he has shown you mercy." The man went away and began to proclaim in the 10 cities all that Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. First line of my sermon is "Thank you, Tim." So that's why you need to be able to ad lib. Thank you, Joy. A question to those of you who grew up in church, or just have gone to church in the last little while. Was your church more about the personal aspects of faith or more about the political aspects of faith? What would you say? More personal, some of you? Anyone political? Maybe a little bit, yeah, I know. Was your church more, let's say, about saving souls, or was it more about resisting systems? I have a couple, okay. For me, I mean, moving from a more evangelical upbringing into a more post-evangelical church place, I've seen both sides of that spectrum, from the personal to the political, from the soul to the system. But as I consider this story today, I wonder if it would help to see it less as a spectrum and more as a set of layers stacked on top of each other. So that's what my sermon title is about. We're going to work the layers together today. So let's start with our first layer. This is going to be the topsoil of our story. This is a story about a man, a person, a soul, if you will. We don't know his name. He's only ever called the demon-possessed man, or the demoniac, as some of you may have seen it, or in Greek, the demonizomeno. So that's a mouthful. This all seems kind of impersonal, maybe a little bit shaming though, so let's call him Gary from the Gerasenes. So Jesus crosses over a huge lake, the Sea of Galilee, it seems just to reach Gary. He gets his disciples in a boat after dark, and then he falls asleep while a raging storm is brewing and hits their boat, and they have to wake him up, and he calms the storm. He shows them that he has power over the wind and the waves. And his disciples are relieved when they see the shore, obviously, until they see the tombs, and they wince. And then they see 2,000 pigs on the hillside, and they are revolted. This is Gentile land. This is uncharted territory for Jesus and the disciples. This place is unclean and will defile them. And just to make things worse, they are immediately accosted by, I would say, the worst kind of welcoming committee, namely Gary, a scary man possessed by evil or unclean spirits. Now we need to pause here, because this is an exorcism story, as you may have noticed. And those who are here are going to have different experiences and associations with this idea of exorcisms and demons. Some of us might have had experiences somewhat like this in our churches or mission trips. Others might think, demons may have been a thing in Jesus's time, but now they're just for horror films. Some might see this as a biblical way of describing physical or mental illnesses. And I think most crucially for our congregation, some here have experienced the spiritual violence of people trying to exorcise the supposed demons of queerness with or without our consent. So I'm not going to pretend like this is not a fraught topic. But rather than doing an extensive debate on demonology right here, I'm going to suggest that we focus on empathizing with the actual effects that this phenomenon is having on Gary's life. Without implying that you personally have demons, I want to see if you can resonate with any aspects of Gary's experience, or if you can think of people you know who may resonate. Gary is someone who has lost touch with his own sense of identity. Whatever powers or thoughts have colonized his mind or spirit, they have confused him and convinced him that he is worthless. He can't separate himself from the impulses that are controlling him. Gary is utterly vulnerable. His life is in literal ruins. There's no indication in this text that he hurt other people, but we know he has inflicted violence on himself. Maybe as an expression of repressed anger or desperation. Gary is painfully alone, ostracized by his community. He may be possessed by spirits, but he's been dispossessed by his friends and his family. Now, I'm sure they tried their best to help him, then maybe to control him, but they failed to either bind him or set him free. So they cut him off. They left him to roam the outskirts of their village, naked and howling and sheltered only by tombs, corpses for his company, smelling of death. Maybe some of those things were more relatable than others, but I think the key thing to notice about this person of Gary, and especially what Jesus responds with in this surface layer we're looking at, is that Jesus is undeterred by Gary's impurity. Jesus has no fear or disgust. Instead, he responds with fierce compassion for this tortured human and uses his power to set this person free. There's really no contest here for Jesus. The demons or the inner powers that are oppressing Gary, they might put up a front, but they almost immediately begin kneeling and pleading with Jesus. They know that Jesus has complete authority in this situation. And so they ask for Jesus's permission to enter these pigs. And then the pigs promptly rush into the sea, perhaps ignoring that Jesus has just proven his power over the sea as well. And in the blink of an eye, this man, Gary, who's been so tormented, is restored to health, restored to peace. Jesus has rehumanized him. He comes back to himself, moves back in. He is Gary again. He is still. He's sound. And as the page turn was fumbling, verse 15 said, he is clothed, he's dressed. Don't ask me where the clothes came from. Maybe some of the disciples shared some layers of their own with Gary. So at this top layer, this is a story about a savior who would brave a stormy sea to reach a contaminated place just to liberate one God-forsaken man from his inner agony before crossing right back over to the other side. This top layer is so important because Gary matters. And it matters that Jesus uses his power to free individual people from their pain. And there is another layer to this story, probably several, but we're just going to dig down to one more layer together, from this personal level to the political. Because this is a story about a man, but it's also a story about the Roman Empire. This story was written by Mark, and Mark's first clue that we should start digging a little bit is when we Google the location for this story, the region of the Gerasenes, the 10 cities, and we find that it's over 50 kilometers away from the lake shore. You can't reach it by boat. So Mark's using some tricky geography here, which was common in this time. Accurate facts about things like this were less important than the associations or the point that Mark is trying to make symbolically in the way he's telling the story. Our second clue that this excavation is necessary is the name legion. Legion was a word borrowed from the Latin. And if anyone in Jesus's circles heard that word, their minds would go immediately to the Roman army. Their only association with the word legion was the largest unit in the army at that time, comprised of about 6,000 foot soldiers and 700 horsemen. I learned from theologian Ched Myers that when Mark was writing his gospel, which was 40 years after Jesus died, there was a legion posted in Palestine with a boar or a wild pig on its legionary standard, on its flag. Interesting. And at that time, a bunch of Jewish patriots had settled in this region, in this kind of Gentile area. And these were people who were actively revolting against the Roman Empire. And wouldn't you know it, in retaliation for these revolts, the Roman Emperor Vespasian sent a legion to attack that area. They killed 1,000 men. They took their families captive. They burned the cities. Could Mark have chosen the Gerasenes as a setting for this story to call to mind that horrible, death-dealing legion? I think this is kind of likely. And then the third clue has to do with the pigs themselves. Not only are they on the flags of this legion, but in verse 11, Mark describes a herd of pigs, which is an odd word choice, seeing as pigs don't travel or gather in herds. But that word herd, or agele in Greek, happens to also refer to groups of new army recruits. And verse 13 has two more Greek verbs that are common in military settings. When Jesus is giving permission for the legion to enter the pigs, he's using the Greek word for dismissing a troop. And the word used when the pigs are rushing over the cliff is the same as the command for an army to charge forward. And maybe you already picked up this reference, but any Jew reading this story, hearing about a legion drowned in the sea, would certainly be thinking back to Pharaoh's armies in the book of Exodus who were swallowed up by the Red Sea. Now, this is kind of a sidebar, but I personally hope this whole pig thing didn't actually happen. That it was like a symbolic thing for Mark, because the more than human world was important to Jesus, and I don't want to think he would willingly throw away 2,000 of them, even if they were unclean, non-kosher pigs. I actually learned that pigs are pretty good swimmers. So, and 2,000 of them dying would definitely have poisoned the drinking water. So anyway, I hope Mark is not telling a particularly accurate story here, just a deeply true one. So if we dig down and read this political layer of this story, Mark seems to be suggesting that Jesus also has authority to exercise and overpower another kind of legion. That is the military defense forces of the occupying Roman Empire. The Gospel of Mark is a subversive and revolutionary document, y'all. We could consider both of these layers as dealing with kinds of colonialism. I've been doing a whole bunch of learning lately about the theories and methods of colonialism, especially from some Palestinian theologians. And colonialism is really just a fancy word for stealing. So it's going into someone's land, taking the resources you want. It's extractive. It's what the Roman Empire was doing to the Jewish people at this time. They said they're bringing civility and peace, the Pax Romana, but really they're breaking into their house and robbing them. Settler colonialism is a term I've heard a lot, but I only heard it defined recently. Settler colonialism is when those thieves look at that land or that house that they're robbing and they say, actually, this place is pretty great. I think I'm gonna move in here. And the result of settler colonialism is genocide in some form or fashion, because it's never an empty house. It's never terra nullius. It's never a land without a people for a people without a land. There's always indigenous people to deal with, to rebrand as savages or terrorists, to assimilate or subdue or kill. That's why you need a legion. And I think Gary might have been dealing with a kind of inner settler colonialism. His whole being had been subdued, resettled, colonized. Who's to say that one source of Gary's self-harm was not a sort of interiorization of his people's oppression, of their collective anguish? Colonial powers can distort and diminish and dehumanize the colonized. And that's why I believe we must dig through and hold both layers of this story. We can't afford to treat them as mutually exclusive sides of a spectrum, because the personal is political. The hegemonic is made up of human beings. Got some good alliteration here. The individual is part of the institution, and the soul is part of the system. And there are roots and connections running between the layers of this story. Our individual mental, spiritual, and physical health is profoundly affected by structures of colonialism and capitalism and patriarchy and queerphobia. The two legions are not really that distinct. They overlap. And our sources of inner torment are connected to structural evil. The resulting fear and shame can actually result in a bit of a feedback loop, isolation and violence and increasing trauma. And I think that's what we're seeing in Israel right now. It was Holocaust Remembrance Day yesterday. There was this profound structural evil, which resulted in a perpetual sense of vulnerability and fear for Jewish people, passed down even through people's DNA from generation to generation, and then re-traumatized on October 7th. And now the Palestinians become the victims of the victims, and the feedback loop continues. And the hardest part to swallow, the software for this particular colonialism, comes from largely Christian anti-Semitism, Christian Islamophobia, Christian Zionism, which unites those two evils. And that gets me down. Our only hope is that just as the roots of evil run through both layers, so does Jesus's liberatory power run through both layers. Jesus has power to free souls and power to liberate whole peoples, whole political systems. In fact, I think Jesus's power depends on his Spirit's work on both layers, from above and below. So we can't afford, actually, to have churches that emphasize one to the exclusion of the other. Because if we stick just to that top layer, just to the personal, and we forget to dig deeper to the political, then some of you know this from your church experience. Jesus becomes kind of domesticated and spiritualized, just a mechanism to save souls and heal sick people, rather than addressing the powers down here that are perpetually harming them. But if we dig too far and stay down here and only focus on the systems, we forget Jesus's compassion for the plight of individual people up here. We forget that each person is part of Jesus's redemptive plan, that there's a place at the table for every person, even for the Israeli soldier, and that the journey of freedom that Jesus is compassionately guiding us through is intensely personalized for each of us. I want to bring us closer to closing by talking about a kind of middle layer. I don't know if there's any geologists here. I should have come up with some titles for these. But I want to notice the reaction of the other people in this story, because we haven't really talked about the end. When the pig farmers spread the story of what happened to Gary, the city folks come to see for themselves. And our translation says they are in awe, although that word awe could just have easily been translated fear. And instead of being grateful for Jesus's healing and asking Jesus to heal more of them too, they plead with Jesus to leave. And that word plead is the same one used for the demons when they were begging Jesus to be sent into the pigs. Lots of pleading in this story. So Jesus, it seems, is still quite unpalatable. He's still an unwelcome guest. And as we sit in this middle layer, kind of looking up and down, I wonder if the reaction of these people could be relatable to us at all too. I wonder what you think motivated them to beg Jesus to go away. Was it more about the drowning of their pigs? Was it the destruction of property and the resulting loss of income and work for these pig farmers? What else would Jesus cost them? What else might Jesus cost us? Or was it more, as René Girard suggests, about the drowning of their demons? Did the healing and humanizing of Gary stir up some deep unsettledness in them? Maybe they preferred the devil that they knew, the one who was isolated out on the outskirts, out of sight, out of mind, who is now about to move back into the neighborhood. Maybe they feared a Jesus who could master what they could not. What else might Jesus exorcise? What unpredictable, risky change might Jesus bring us? Okay, we're climbing again. We're going to climb from that middle layer and those interesting unanswered questions back up to the surface to return to our friend Gary. Gary is approaching Jesus as Jesus is climbing back in the boat because he's not fighting these people. He's going to leave. And Gary is the one doing the pleading at the very end of the story. He's pleading to get in the boat and be a disciple. Now, you might relate to this. When you get free, sometimes there's this uncomfortable vacuum that results. And one way to avoid that vacuum is to scramble to find a new master. This master is the right one. This one will be better. And even though both of those things are true of Jesus, Jesus will not exploit Gary's craving for this other master. Jesus wants him to sink deep into his freedom and to reconnect with his community, to go home. What a difficult request, actually. Probably easier to run away with Jesus. But more than just returning home, Jesus gives Gary the agency and the dignity and the invitation to be his first missionary to the Gentiles. Now, some of you were in church in the small last week and you read some of Jesus's parables from chapter 4. And Gary, I believe, the demon-possessed man, ended up being, to everyone's surprise, the good soil for the seed to fall on. Gary's roots are going to go down deep through many layers of soil and will bear much fruit. So we've read a story about a man. We've read a story about the Roman Empire. But ultimately, it's a story about Jesus, in whom the layers hold together, in whom the universe holds together. Jesus, the ultimate authority. One who does not hold his authority like so many of our human leaders do. He's not an authority who preys on the fears of others. He doesn't pander to people with money or influence. He will not protect the status quo at all costs. His is not a coercive or violent authority. Rather, quite the opposite. Jesus himself will be bound, will be chained, will be expelled from the city. He will allow himself to be taken to the tombs. He will allow himself to become defiled, undignified, humiliated, all to break the power of sin on both a personal and structural level. And his resurrected liberation is slow and patient and full of love, giving agency and choice for each person to step into it. And this is good news, even if, like the villagers, we sometimes resist it. It's good news for Gary, good news for pig farmers, good news even for, I think, Roman legion soldiers who need to be liberated from the moral injury of the pain they cause. It's good news for both the colonized and the colonizer. It's definitely good news for the pigs. With Jesus's acts of healing and liberation, he grabs the dark veil of despair and cynicism that's hanging over so many of us and tears holes in it, lets the light pour through. His liberation from the legions, all the kinds of legions, are ours to receive. And it's also ours to give. We can become fellow liberators. So let's follow Jesus into the unclean and uncomfortable places, through the storms, into the places of conflict, of desolation, even death. Let's show up. Let's be present to each other and say, you do not walk alone. Show compassion for our fellow humans who need to reclaim their inner wholeness, their sense of identity and hope. And then let's dig down and follow him into the places of oppression and repression and claim his power to uproot colonial systems. We follow the crucified and risen one. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to him, and he is coming again soon. Amen. Just take a second to reflect, and then when you're ready, Tony, feel free to pray.